So we've recently talked a lot about government overreach going on in the UK, in Australia, in Canada, even here in the States, a bit in the US. But now let's talk about the EU itself, the European Union, because they've got this bright idea, real light bulb moment here. This article headline from Cointelegraph reads, EU proposal to scan all private messages gains momentum. With 19 EU member states backing it, the chat control proposal could mandate pre-encryption message scanning on apps like WhatsApp and Signal by October. So we already saw Australia actually, about Signal specifically, trying to do similar stuff to Signal. And the Signal boss, as they put it, essentially said if Australia rolls this out on their app, they're just going to leave Australia entirely. But similarly now, I guess we have the EU trying to scan various platforms. So it just fits the theme that we've been discussing lately with how various governments across the world are trying to enact similar regulations. Now here's the EU. The article goes on to say, a controversial European Union proposal dubbed chat control is regaining momentum, with 19 out of 27 EU member states reportedly backing the measure. The plan would mandate that messaging platforms, including WhatsApp, Signal, and Telegram, must scan every message, photo, and video sent by users starting in October. Even if end-to-end encryption is in place, popular French tech blogger Corbyn wrote on Monday. Denmark reintroduced the proposal on July 1st, the first day of its EU Council presidency. France, once opposed, is now in favor. Corbyn said, citing Patrick Breyer, a former member of the European Parliament for Germany and the European Pirate Party. Belgium, Hungary, Sweden, Italy, and Spain are also in favor, while Germany remains undecided. However, if Berlin joins the majority, a qualified council vote could push the plan through by mid-October, Corbyn said. A qualified majority in the EU Council is achieved when two conditions are met. First, at least 55% of member states, meaning 15 out of 27, must vote in favor. Second, those countries must represent at least 65% of the EU's total population. And they include a tweet from this guy, Pavel Luptak. My bad on the last name. I probably did not say that right, but he says on Twitter, the communist EU in action again. Slovakia, of course, supports this dystopian proposal. Austria, the Netherlands, and Poland are against it. The Czech Republic has not yet made a decision. Chat control. The EU orders all private chats to be scanned starting from October 2025. Under Denmark's EU presidency, a revised proposal mandates client-side scanning of WhatsApp, Signal, and Telegram even before encryption is applied. Backed by around 19 countries, including France, Belgium, it targets adoption by October 14th, so a little redundancy there with the info we already got. But then he says, critics warn, breaks true end-to-end encryption, enables mass surveillance of all messages, AI detection misfires on innocent content, threatens digital privacy, dissent, and minors' rights. Privacy regulators issue strong warnings. The Protect EU law pushes even further decryption access by 2030. Peer encryption scanning on devices. Instead of weakening encryption, the plan seeks to implement client-side scanning, meaning software embedded in users' devices that inspects content before it's encrypted. A bit like if the post office came to read all your letters in your living room before you put them in the envelope, Corbyn said. He added that the real target isn't criminals who use encrypted or decentralized channels, but ordinary users whose private conversations would now be open to algorithmic scrutiny. The proposal cites the prevention of child abuse material as its justification. However, it would result in mass surveillance by means of fully automated real-time surveillance of messaging and chats, and the end of privacy of digital correspondence, Breyer wrote. Beyond scanning, the package includes mandatory age verification, effectively removing anonymity from messaging platforms. Digital freedom groups are asking citizens to contact their MEPs, sign petitions, and push back before the law becomes irreversible. So yeah, lots of very disturbing and suspicious stuff going on here, to say the least. But something that sticks out to me in particular is how, if I'm understanding this right, apparently if a member country of the EU tries to domestically pass a new law, for argument's sake, let's just say it's like their version of UK's Online Safety Act, and it doesn't end up passing domestically, politicians can still try and get the EU itself to pass this hypothetical bill, which, if it then passes in the EU, those member states would be forced to roll out that bill domestically, which in other words means that by proxy of the EU, it essentially gives corrupt politicians a second chance at passing something domestically, even if their own citizens are against it. Then we got this little image that essentially seems to recap what we just went over. So let's finish off the article. Here's the final section. France faces societal collapse over censorship. Last month, Telegram founder Pavel Durov warned that France risks societal collapse if it continues down a path of political censorship and regulatory overreach. Durov was arrested in France in August 2024 after being accused of failing to moderate his app to reduce criminality. He also alleged that French intelligence officials approached him earlier this year with requests to censor pro-conservative content ahead of the May 2025 Romanian election, a request he says he refused. Look, the sad fact is there are some horrific things that does occur on these apps, but clearly the government having this sort of power can be easily abused, as we just read, essentially, to even control like political opposition. This can so quickly spiral into just like overt authoritarianism where like, oh, they sent something that was critical of the government, yeah, knock on their door, or something like that, which we've already been seeing playing out in the UK. For example, we talked about this before. Apparently from gov.uk, they had said that like if you have the opinion that Western culture is under threat from mass migration and a lack of integration by certain ethnic and cultural groups, which many people in the UK do have that opinion, and it seems to be an opinion that is quickly proliferating as people see what's going on in their country, well, they say that's cultural nationalism and therefore also extreme right wing and ultimately a terrorist ideology. That image was apparently a part of an online training course by this organization called Prevent, where they say Prevent is one part of the government's overall counter-terrorism strategy, and it's described as a multi-agency program that, quote, aims to stop individuals becoming terrorists, unquote. A Home Office spokesman said, Prevent is not about restricting debate or free speech, but about protecting those susceptible to radicalization. It's really some pretty backwards stuff. I mean, many citizens in the UK are in fact concerned about radicals using asylum as a shield to come into their country and then do horrific things to women and children there. And instead of the government helping their concerned citizens, they are turning around and labeling them as the actual radicals. In some cases, it actually is even worse than that, because they're treating the literal victims this way when the victims come out and speak about this stuff. And statistically, victims of these awful crimes don't always come forward. A lot of people try to bury these things and not think about them, let alone talk about them to other people, especially on like a national level. And then imagine you already have all those concerns, which are scientifically documented very well. But on top of all that stuff, you then also have to be worried about your own government coming after you for speaking about the horrific things that were done to you. I mean, they should be protecting these people, not trying to intimidate them into silence or labeling them a terrorist for speaking about this stuff. It's just so backwards, as mentioned. Hopping over to the subreddit privacy, we'll take a look at some reception to the news that we went over regarding the EU, with the top response saying, I was mentioning this in one of the comments I made. The next step is to ban encryption. For example, banning apps that encrypt messages. All I'm going to say is you can't comply your way out of this mess. Top response that's a bit more long-winded reads, this was never really about protecting children or national security. It's about quietly removing the concept of private communication and doing it in a way that seems reasonable enough to avoid pushback. Notice who's under pressure and who isn't. Platforms built entirely on surveillance and behavioral profiling, no problem. But the few that refuse to break E2E encryption, that design systems to keep third parties, including governments, out, and that don't monetize users as data points, those are the ones being targeted. It's about forcing the holdouts to comply by regulation, by threat, or by slow attrition. Call it whatever you want. But this isn't policy, it's coercion in disguise, and they're counting on the public being too distracted to realize which walls are being torn down. I regularly write to EU bodies, the Commission, and members of the EP. I talk to friends, colleagues, and anyone who will listen, because if we just sit back and watch, one day we'll wake up in a world where privacy no longer exists and control and surveillance are complete. And that's the latest. Let me know what you guys think about this stuff in the comments, and as always, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed my coverage, please also consider liking and or subscribing. Helps out greatly, and I appreciate it. I'll see you in the comments here and in the next one.